as a leader, but also as leading by example, by personal practice. It's making sure that you demonstrate that ownership beyond just making your calls, right? And I think about some of the guys that we used to work with, and the biggest shifts were actually not within the workplace. It actually was the impact and the ripple effect of what instilling an ownership culture actually meant to these guys in their personal lives as well.
Welcome to another fabulous episode of the B2B Sales Trends Podcast, my lovely people. The show that brings you hacks, tips, thought leadership to the topic of B2B selling. My name is Kendlbacher, and today's episode is all about owning it. Now, what is it that you can own? You can own accountability, curiosity, and everything to do around those two topics. And with me on this episode on this topic is Amy Spurgeon. Amy is the VP of Growth for WPP, and I'm super excited to have Amy as a podcast episode guest today. Welcome to the B2B Sales Trends Podcast, Amy.
Thank you so much. Excited to be here.
Lovely to have you. Thank you for making time. Amy, welcome. Let's talk a little bit about your journey today. Give us a bit of an introduction about yourself. I know you've worked across sales, you've worked across enablement, and now growth at WPP. What shaped your perspective on how sales teams operate best?
Yeah, of course. I have had a very long tenure in sales. I actually started when I was 15, cold calling on the phones. It was my first job during high school. Someone handed me a big phone book, and I literally went from A to Z through the entire phone book, asking people if they would like to sell their house. So it was an interesting introduction to sales, but I think anyone who started down that path can agree that it builds a very strong foundation in order to propel your career. It teaches you a lot of things around resilience and how to convince people to stay on the line past 3 seconds. But from there, I went into a real estate role. So around 18, started running my own business, and I did that for about 8 years in New Zealand. And that was speaking of the topic of accountability, it's one of those places where it certainly teaches you how to be accountable. I was 100% commission based as my very first job. So it was an interesting adaptation to teaching that. And again, I think, speaks to the resilience and the drive and the grit that you need when the buck stops with you. But I launched into a recruitment role following that, and then found my home in advertising. I worked for the brand power company for 5 years, where I was doing a mixture of running my own accounts and leading sales teams that was across Australia and Singapore and across to the US. And there were just so many excellent opportunities to demonstrate that. And that role really taught me the importance of ownership and accountability, and really started to build out a more rigid framework in my mind as we started to think about how do you adopt it in yourself, but also how do you teach it to other people. And so that was the real platform for that. And from there, obviously went into WPP, which is a growth role, a entirely different kettle of fish from an execution perspective, from going from the hard line of picking up the phone to a growth role, but certainly an interesting extension of that.
Love that. You've mentioned accountability and how to teach that. My first thought is, why would you want to teach it? Well, my assumption is to sort of to scale this sort of thinking, these behaviors, and to build sort of a culture of ownership in a way. From your experience, what does accountability really look like in sales, and why does it make such a difference?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think first, to answer it, there's an interesting way that you can kind of break it down just to kind of level set as to what these two things mean. So I certainly, when I first started diving into the concept of it, I think there was a piece of reflection to go, what does ownership mean in isolation? What does accountability mean in isolation? And when you combine the two things, what is the interlinking relationship between the two? And surprisingly, I actually wasn't really able to define either, having come through, the sales role, and I knew that I demonstrated it and I could see what it meant in other people, but didn't really have that grounding of that actual description of it. And where we came to land on, we did, multiple sessions with the team just to understand what their perspective of it was. Ownership is the claiming of the piece. It says, this is I own this. I am taking full responsibility for it. The buck stops with me. Whereas accountability is often the metric or the KPI or the measurement of how ownership actually shows up in a workplace or in your home life as well. And so when you start to think about the implementation of that for both yourself and within sales organizations, it's helpful to refer back to that framework and ground it in both of those. What does ownership tell you? What are the behaviors and the intangible things that demonstrate how you are actually demonstrating ownership? And what are the pieces where you think, okay, what is the metric that I can apply to that allows me to measure and KPI against that? So when you think about it in the lens of prospecting, for example, at the end of the day, we know that prospecting reaches your meeting KPIs, reaches your pitches, reaches your closed contracts, or whatever your sales funnel looks like. But ultimately, it ladders up to the target and what you're expected to perform on a yearly basis. There's a difference between owning that and committing to the daily practice and saying, I own my target. I am responsible for doing this through mighty, and that means that your numbers might fluctuate and you might have to increase the effort that comes through. That's a demonstration of ownership. The metric itself is actually the number of calls that you're holding yourself accountable to.
Love that. Really nice. That's really important, I think, for people to understand, because these terms are thrown around in sales forever, and and everybody talks about ownership and account, and I think you've explained that really well for the audience, so thank you. There is a link between accountability and I've got this from a pre-meeting that we had a week or so ago. There's a link between accountability and curiosity, and curiosity is often called superpower is probably a bit of a big term for it, but it's key in sales, right? But curiosity doesn't happen without ownership. If a rep doesn't feel responsible for the outcome, they won't dig deeper. They won't open up the opportunity. How do you see accountability in a way fueling curiosity? And what does that combination unlock in a client conversation?
Yeah. It's an interesting question when you start to think about the tangibility of these things and how they interlock. Because when you think about accountability, for example, if you have accountability without ownership, then you're just using the stick method, right? You're just, beating around with KPIs. There isn't, the buy-in, the ownership. There isn't somebody that's got that foundation. So you need the ownership and the responsibility that's being taken, plus the accountability. So you're holding yourself accountable to do those things. And that's where you breed this ecosystem that allows for the curiosity to come through. It allows that place to come through. I think it's also a North Star or an indicator to show that you have ownership of something. So curiosity can show up in the way that you prep for your discovery meetings. There's been times where I haven't prepped for a meeting and, I've had my ass handed to me and said, you clearly don't understand our business or XYZ. And then there's been times where you have over prepped and that you've gone really deep into these places of curiosity, and it's a demonstrative ownership in both scenarios. But once you are able to breed this environment where you do have a sales force full of ownership and you have people that are showing up and saying, no matter what, I'm prepared to make this deal happen. I'm prepared to make this target happen. I'm prepared to win this pitch. It's when you've got people who are committed to the cause, and as a result of that, you'll find that curiosity comes through. I think people can often misconfuse curiosity as well with asking questions. But I
Yeah,
think it
what's
goes
the
more
difference
broadly
in
than that. It's
how,
thinking
how
about
do
the
you
ecosystem.
yeah, how do you
Okay.
differentiate the two, and how explain that to me? That would be great.
Yeah. So I define curiosity as a personal interest, right? It's like, where are you going? And that could be through asking questions. It could be through research. It could be
Yeah.
contemplation or meditation or any of those tools that you have within your wheelhouse in order to explore and expand an idea. And it's
Mm,
come from a personal drive. It's not necessarily come from somebody else telling you to do it. Because I think when that piece comes through, or where it's part of an instruction or a directive, you tend to lose a little bit of the curiosity, but you can obviously, usher people in that direction. But I think especially when you come through and you want people to show up with more ownership and accountability, you will see them start to demonstrate some of those behaviors,
right.
and perhaps prompt them through as well.
We always hear from our clients that buyers are more educated. There's tons of research out there in addition to what they say. Budgets. Nobody ever has budget for anything. Competition is out there. You are in a competitive industry. In that environment, how does a culture of accountability change the way sales teams show up for those clients?
Yeah. It's an interesting one because if you start to break it out across the different sales processes, right, and use top level prospecting, meeting, pitch, discovery,
Mm,
whatever piece you want to come through. It's like you mentioned before in terms of the meeting prep. There is a different depth of understanding when you start to think about discovery. So
mm,
you could be selling a SaaS product, and you come from a product based perspective to say, this is the benefits, this is the features, these are the things that I want to sell you, because this is the piece that marketing or whoever has given me, is it armed me with. But curiosity says, okay, well, what is the MarTech stack, or what is the ecosystem in which they live in? Or you're dealing with a chocolate factory, the price of cocoa has changed, or whatever it might be that
mm,
is causing this influential factor. You're thinking broader than just the narrow tunnel vision of what a product sale might have. And by having that deep sense of curiosity, you're able to explore that piece further. And so when you can come back and go, okay, was I curious in that? You're holding yourself accountable for your curiosity in that scenario. But the three
mm.
are explicitly interlinked when you start to go around the hamster wheel of it all.
One thing that strikes me when I listen to you, obviously the depth of looking at that topic, I think, is key. But when I
Mm.
take this a little bit higher, a few thousand feet up and looking down, ownership, accountability. Okay, I get it. Not
Yeah,
rocket science. Hello. I'm a
do
salesperson. I'm
it. Yeah.
experienced. What are you doing? I've got to
Yeah.
show up. I know all these things.
Mm.
Why do you think that salespeople are really bad at it, though?
Well, I honestly don't know, because when you think about your top reps and you think about the
Mm,
people that have it,
mm,
and they're like, you go, you're the superstar. They often
mm.
demonstrate these qualities. They
Yeah.
have the ownership. But I do truly think, and this is obviously meant no offense, but I think it goes broader than just the ownership and accountability of your
Right.
role, right?
Right.
When you start to think about it in a broader spectrum, are you
Mm,
showing up on time to meet your friends? Are you watering your plants? Are you paying your rent on time?
right.
Like, are you taking ownership for the responsibilities and the commitments
Mm,
that you pursue? Or are you kind of like letting things happen to you or around you and not really taking the responsibility of that as well?
yeah.
I think on the other side of that, there's a key piece in here which comes back to the humility. And I think a key derivative of ownership can be humility. And so when you start to think about how you can show up and say, yeah, actually, I did make a mistake. And, there's been times where you've had to backtrack, or you're on a call and you don't know the answer. And you have to say, look, I'm really sorry, but I actually am not sure on what that might be. That humility and that humbleness that I don't know is necessarily ingrained in most, salespeople, when it is that super
Yeah.
competitive commission based environment.
Yeah.
You know, there is the capacity for us to, I think, become a little bit more humble and a little bit more honest and a little bit more real with people and say,
Right.
am I actually being humble? Do I actually have ownership
Yeah.
of this? And it requires a
Right.
deeper sense of self reflection that
right?
It's difficult to infuse in a workplace environment for sure.
It is, and I think there's two things in addition to what you said. I think there is the case of it's not difficult understanding all this stuff intellectually, right? It's
Yeah.
not. I mean, all smart people, they all get it, but it's difficult to execute it. How do I really do that? I know what to do, but I not
Yes.
always know how to do it. And that's where, in my experience, is the disconnect. The other thing that I would add, and I really like your description of how you started to answer this question, is something, and I think I watched it on the webinar. Recently, I don't know who said it or did I see it on social media? But anyway, it stuck with me. It was this idea of how you do anything. That's how you do everything.
Agree.
Right?
Yeah.
And that sort of really goes and links into what you said, how you show up, how you pay your rent, how you clean up, your apartment, how you do anything. That's how you do everything. I really like that. That really resonated with me. And in the sales world, oh my God, isn't that just true?
True. Yeah. And I think it's, as a leader, but also as leading by example, by personal practice, it's making sure that you demonstrate that ownership beyond just making your calls, right? And think about some of the guys that we used to work with, and the biggest shifts were actually not within the workplace. It actually was the impact and the ripple effect of what instilling an ownership culture actually meant to these guys in their personal lives as well, where they started having deeper relationships with people because they were showing up on time, And I know that it's super simple and oversimplified manner, but when you start to really commit to the process of it and be honest with yourself and say, was I having full ownership of that? Was I a good person in that meeting? Probably not, and it gives you the launch pad for you then to hold yourself in a different type of accountability and create a really safe space to say, you know what, actually, I did make a mistake from it. How are we going to learn from it? What does it look like next time? What is the protocol that I need to put in place? What's the reps that I need to do to ingrain this as a behavior, not just a one-off task?
Yeah.
Because I think on that note as well, like ownership is like trust in the sense that it's not a one-off execution. You can't just become an owner. I mean, you can have plants and houses and cars and things like that. But when you start to think about accounts and the development of relationships with other people, you can show up once and show ownership. But if you show up another time and demonstrate that you don't have it, then it automatically falls away. Right. And so you have to keep going. You have to keep practicing and showing the commitment to it as well.
Love it. For the managers listening to this, for the sales leaders listening to this, who really want to strengthen what you have just described, that accountability in their teams, and where would you start? What's the advice that you would give to them, what they can do tomorrow to reinforce that ownership piece, that accountability piece, without killing the whole team's morale immediately?
Yeah, it is an easy thing to do, right? Because, accountability, as I mentioned before, can feel like a stick if you don't have the ownership. So how do you create the foundation in order to build that up? And look, I can only speak from past experience in terms of, how I've been able to do this with myself and with the team. But I think being clear on the definition of what that actually means, because I think we do throw around these terms. It's like consultative selling, or, it's just like these repetitive things that we talk about, but nobody actually does. And so what is ownership and accountability to you as a team? And I think that definition changes when you start to bring in different groups and different dynamics. If you can build the foundation of what that means as a team and having that sitting there, you're then going to find that you have kind of two camps of people, the people who have ownership and the people that don't really have ownership. And I think there's different pathways in terms of how you instill that through one-on-one coaching. We did all sorts of wild things. I was buying the team plants at one point, saying, this is a demonstration of ownership. You own the plant, you got to water the plants like your KPIs, you got to keep this thing alive for the rest of the year, like go for it, And it brought so much joy, but I think the analogy of it really was able to help in that practical element. But from there as well, it's creating accountability and a metric that makes sense depending on whether they have ownership or don't, right? As I said before, I think that there's opportunity for us to create accountability around curiosity, for example. So like, okay, well, what did you do on that call to be curious? Right? It's a different type of accountability where you're trying to instill all of these different practices. It's asking the questions slightly differently versus being strict on KPIs, when I think the foundation perhaps needs some work sometimes.
Love it. Amy, tell me about that plant. You touched on it. You bought your people a plant. Tell me the whole story around this.
We did. So we were in a position where there was some ownership being demonstrated across the teams, but I think, young sales reps literally on the phone trying to, get numbers out, and it's very KPI based, like get your numbers, get your meeting numbers, all of those kind of things. It is difficult, right, to motivate salespeople through KPIs. I mean, we're not going to beat around the bush unless you've got someone who's like hungry as hell.
Right.
And so when you start to think about like account-based selling, I think there's a higher need for ownership as you start to dive into some of the aspects that we were talking about before around discovery and, keeping your KPIs and your meeting numbers up. And so we had come up with this kind of year-long program to really look at the foundation of ownership and accountability. And there were lots of different activities that we were going to do through the process. And the first one was that we did a whiteboard session around ownership and accountability. So we defined those with the team, and we created a list of value propositions and ways that the team were going to hold each other accountable to those value props, so that we were really becoming a cohesive unit of people that operated together and were focused on the metric of ownership and accountability. Now, I realize that some of these can feel like a little schooly, and so we didn't really want it to like veer too much into the, learning, whiteboards, all of that kind of stuff, which we know sales reps have like a strong aversion to. And so I was kind of going, how do we make this fun? How do we infuse this? How do we give a metaphor? I always love driving cars. It's like you're in the driver's seat, you've got the control of the pedal and whatever, but there's only so much words can go. And so I was reflecting on how, like, where do I demonstrate ownership in my own personal life, right? And like, what does that actually look like in a practical day-to-day? And I am a plant lover. I know that you can't see my apartment right now, but I have, 40, 50 plants in my tiny New York apartment, and I just love them. And there's something, it's a newer hobby that I found later in life of just like loving the energy of nature and having that in my home. And I've really taken full ownership for these guys. I mean, they have names. Some of them have googly eyes on their sticks, and, we've gone the whole hog, but I love it. And so I was thinking about how we demonstrate, the value of growth and what that looks like as we continue to nurture something and tying that in. And that's where, I drew this back in. I ironically was sitting in my apartment when I came up with the idea, funnily enough. And so we just got little plants. They were just little seedlings, $4 or $5. And so it didn't, it wasn't a huge lift. But, after doing that exercise and giving them the task and saying, hey guys, now you've got this foundation, we've got our agreements, we've got our accountability. Here's an opportunity for you to really take ownership and demonstrate that in practice. You don't have to be an avid gardener to do this. Think about the support network that you have within the organization. Who can you ask to help you nurture the plant? If you're going to go away, who are you going to ask? Like, you got to ask someone to water the plant. And it's through that practice of thinking about how you're really taking responsibility for it. And, plant goes sick, what are you going to do? How are you going to care for it? Who's going to help you? Where are you going to get the fertilizer from? It's just instilling those kind of things to say, take ownership, own it, claim it. It's yours. Look after it as if it was your own.
Love it. Love it. I absolutely love it. Amy, tell me, you've been at this game since a very early age at the sales game. Tell me the top 3 qualities that elite salespeople nowadays need to execute consistently to be elite salespeople. What would those top 3 qualities be?
Yeah. Well, I think based on today's conversation, would be remiss not to say curiosity. It's
Yeah,
one of
right.
my
Up
personal
the
values as well. Top of the list, unsurprisingly.
yeah.
But I think genuinely, and it's hard to identify that in an interview environment. But I think sometimes when you are speaking to people, you can genuinely tell in terms of the way that they have been able to explore topics and things like that. I think curiosity comes through that list. And I do say ownership, but I think the benchmark of it would be more so around the humility. Like, where have you been able to show up and then, apologize or notice that you've done something that maybe wasn't your best, and like, how are you going to fix it? How are you going to improve from there? And then honestly, just joy, like having fun with life, having fun with sales, having enthusiasm for connecting with other people and all of those kind of things, I think is just so important. We take life so seriously these days, and especially sales in corporate environments. And there is so much joy, and people buy off people that they like. And so if you, you want to be sitting down having a beer with these people, or, a non-alcoholic beverage. And so I think that is a huge piece as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Amy. I know our listeners really, really appreciate your insights, your thought leadership on the topic. So thank you for making the time.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. It's been fun.
My lovely people, 2 calls to action. You've heard it from Amy. Curiosity, humility, and joy are the things that you need to execute to be a top elite sales person. A couple of calls to action. Go to the B2B Sales site, subscribe, and share this or other episodes with people who you think this would be applicable to. Go to globalperformancegroup.com. Check out the latest news on how you can increase win rates. Until the next episode, look after yourself, look after your loved ones and your B2B clients, and buy your team a plant. All the best. Bye-bye.